Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Faye McCalmont, Director of Cultural Affairs here at Western New Mexico University, and I want to thank you so much for joining us for the second session of the Transcending Borders film and presentation series. Of course, we were supposed to have this series at the 2020 Fiesta Latina last June, when everything had to be canceled due to COVID. But I would really like to thank our funders and sponsors for helping us to make this program virtual. So thank you to the New Mexico Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I'd also like to thank our own Western Institute for Lifelong Learning because they've been a great promotional partner for everything that Cultural Affairs does. And then just to tell you that we will be having time at the end of the presentation for a question and answer. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box and I'll make sure to get them to our presenter, Stephanie. Also, there will be an evaluation survey that we really need you to fill out immediately following the presentation, and that link will also be in the chat box. So now we will begin with a very short documentary film called Rebozos con Pluma of Alwiran, featuring artisan Albertina Batista. And then we'll go right to Stephanie for her presentation. So Stephanie Schneiderman was born in Havana, grew up in Mexico City, lived and studied in Miami, went to graduate school in Phoenix. She has a BA in Political Science and International Relations, a certificate in Latin American Caribbean Studies from Florida International University, and received a master's degree from the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Glendale, Arizona. Latin blood literally runs through her veins. Stephanie has traveled extensively throughout Mexico and, given her cultural and language fluency, has gained access to many off-the-path locations and communities. And I can attest to that because she's taken me to some of those. When her friends ask why she always goes back to Mexico, she replies, "Mexico is a vast country and it would take your entire life to explore it." So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Stephanie Schneiderman, who will be going to immediately following the short film. Thank you.
Urgente guards, Rebozos ane shuka wirane. Ucet family jaksaya mi tu jaka, ma ucet dermana chke. Bueno, en Ganiatiri, pukan edad de 9 años, sí. Es jatim pico cuspian cuchet, mamanan, mainden, 11, tama piruat, 11. Y man, charna, dan, buenas, pichke, como es jatin en angus, ya. Utsi, cual hueta, en janchka, tatajuano, ya necesita en boy. Ahora, en ambe hatsikuaya, plum hatsikuaya, pan, wambe hatsikuaya, Rebozos, cano hatsikuan, pan. Inden verane, sed, panatilukunane. Ka Rebozos hatitske, cano, ma hatitske, sed, pachkano, hatsikuneca, senta, voto, no hatsine. Miras, Chaca, Karan, Danjang, Paloma, Situerang, Wechane, Brume, Janchka, ma blast, en Gakshan, Wawashko, is no Karan, Senecan. Kani chang karatang na meyang bukas paloma chima utas truswani comes to Mateo so campana de in jachacote. O sea, church canang fiesta rojan San Mateo himboye shukinji guekia yakan shukan singing in the Rebozos rojan. His canang could sing shuk with the takan wet guinos again. Judy can queer get a wonder and no ayaka. And then Nas Rebozos and Hazian Yas Nahas Mawayaka. Tres meses symbolic was Wachkangani garisang paseng senguna tiguanaga. Hitching is running up Garinas, Kachkanu Jawas, Yarevos, Wachana. Kais Hamagombinari as young, Chachix against the Lume, Janang Faisani, Powerari, Ga Faisani, Gan Guerwe, Dinguit, Gan Jinchi. Gang Kuchkeman dino Angaristin, Gang Enganeari wake up Kematistin. Next dinner wake up in Urengo and Nox not an intelligent explain or party pain their case cookchen. Pero sun de uche deti to which makes hams and Dangorengo and girls. Jobberman and that to Mamma is not nice well time.
Thank you so much for showing that video, beautiful video. We thank the Instituto del Artesano Michoacano for sharing the beautiful textile craft of their state. Many of us here know how beautiful their work is in all different materials. We really do love Michoacan. And thank you, Faye, for your beautiful introduction. It's an honor for me to be here with everybody today. And I really appreciate the invitation from Western New Mexico University. Sadly, we couldn't be there, but I think these virtual events really do bring us together in many ways, in our hearts, minds, and souls. So even though they're virtual, we're all here, and I thank you for that. So I will begin with our presentation on the Mexican rebozo. I tried to balance some history and some living expressions. I had my first encounter with the rebozo. I think I'll show it to you before we get into the presentation. Many young women of Mexico begin their relationship with the rebozo, young women and young children, swaddled in their mother's rebozo. And I think many people can relate to that who grew up in Mexico or grew up in the United States with a Mexican mother. I can't imagine what that would have been like. In my case, my mother had this beautiful rebozo in our living room. It was just sort of draped very casually over the sofa. So I feel that in unconscious ways, as we're children, these things have been absorbed by me. And I can see them and feel them today as an adult. So with this rebozo, I'm also honoring my dear mother. Let us begin. So today we're going to be talking about this singular garment, and it seems kind of odd that we might take some specific time to talk about one piece of cloth. But this cloth is imbued with all of Mexico's history, its past, and its present, and we hope its future. So we celebrate and honor the Mexican rebozo. Again, why the Mexican rebozo? Why is this such a special topic? Well, as we'll see, this garment reflects Mexico's pluri-ethnic history. It was widespread throughout the colonial period. It played an important visual and material role in Mexico's revolution. It later became a national symbol of Mexico. And like a sari is to India or a kimono to Japan, the rebozo is to Mexico. We honor the artisans who create this historic, complex, and beautiful garment. The sari and the kimono are reflective of two countries we know. And here, the rebozo to Mexico. Later, the Mexican rebozo became a symbol of Mexicanidad in its efforts to build the identity of national identity following the Mexican Revolution. We'll get to that later, but here I'm showing this beautiful, beautiful rebozo as a symbol of Mexico's nation building after the revolution. Some people, so we're going to step back a little bit in history and ask, where do we think this may have come from? Where did it evolve from? Was it a pre-Hispanic garment? Was it a colonial garment? Did it come from the East? Did it come from the West? All of the above? This is like a multiple choice. So we will learn through this presentation that it's a fusion or syncretic garment that has encapsulated the confluence of ideas and customs that came from the East and the West, combining with what was already present in Mesoamerica. Through all of that synergy, something new emerged. And I think that's really important, because this isn't just an adoption of things that are just being, let's say, replicated. This is something new that didn't happen and wasn't existent anywhere else. It became a mestizo garment. So we look at some of, how do we know this? So we look at some pre-Hispanic garments to see, I think this is sometimes a very good way to approach, just let's look at the visual references. In Mesoamerica, the cloth did not endure because of the climate changes of the landscape. So people have to turn to codices, Spanish records, to see what did dress look like in pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica. Also look at sculpture. So when you go into museums in Mexico, make sure you look at the fine detail on what the figurines are wearing. And also in murals. Here's some beautiful murals at Calakmul that show this woman in the diaphanous dress. Quite extraordinary. So all of these pre-Hispanic images we see today in all of us who've been to Mexico and have seen the garments, these are still here. The huipil, the enredo wrap skirt, the beautiful quechcamatl derived from 2 panels, and occasionally we will see headdresses and shoulder coverings, sabanas, and different items. And in this wonderful book, The Indian Clothing Before Cortes by Patricia Reef Anawalt, helps us understand a little bit about what Mesoamerican dress, the pan-Mesoamerican dress, looked like. So we can, through that visual reference, we can kind of say there really was nothing there that looked in function or form like what we know today as the Mexican rebozo. One thing that was present in Mesoamerica that is very important in the adoption and adaptation and the current importance of the rebozo was that spinning, dyeing, and weaving traditions and knowledge ran deep in Mesoamerica, making those future adaptations very fluid. We see this, the previous one, this is from the Codex Mendoza, and this next one is from a later document known as the Florentine Codices. This is a beautiful Maya sculpture of the hyena sculpture tradition. And also their weaving goddesses were very important in Mesoamerica. So Weaving was an essential part of the socioeconomic and ritual life of women in Mesoamerica. It was not a sidebar. It was probably the single most important mission of a young girl and a woman is to be a weaver. And to be an accomplished one was a great honor. With the arrival of the Spaniards in the 16th century, abrupt change occurred in Mesoamerica. European, Spanish, Moorish styles, Asian styles and techniques, and the evangelization, which is very important that we'll see, all started to take place very quickly. So a fusion of ideas, beliefs, material culture, know-how, food, dress, all started to take place. So again, it wasn't just adopting old ideas, but it was creating entirely new ones and new adaptations. New Spain was in fact new. In early paintings of Mexico City, we can see how it was a great amalgam of many cultures. So there was a tremendous amount of assimilation early on when the colony began. And I think it's important to also recognize the role of symbols in the unification and nation building that occurred when New Spain was a very, very early colony. So we know how Tonantzin, the goddess Tonantzin, was, I don't know if co-opted is the right word, but she was employed in the, later became the Guadalupe, who is known as the Queen of Mexico. This to me is important in that it represents some of the myth and creation, how myth is important throughout history of Mexico. So if we're looking just for hard facts, we sometimes have to consider that the myths are actually part of the history of Mexico. So with the evangelization, what was introduced were these head coverings. Some of the academics of Mexico have spent time studying this, and they believe that this is what eventually became, or rapidly became, the, let's say, function of the cloth, to cover the head. This was a Judeo-Christian tradition to cover the head upon entering the sacred space of church, showing humility before man and God. In addition to that, coming from the European side, we have something that was the Spaniards were actually really trying to get to the east, to the Indian Spice Islands, and so they kept going, and they ended up in the Philippines, which they eventually colonized. But the important thing here is that they eventually found the return route. On this map, I find it really interesting, and I know there might be some sailors out there, you'll appreciate this. But the current, as you see that dark line, that was the ocean current, and the only way they could get back on the Manila galleon back to Acapulco was by sailing north. So until that return route was discovered, that finally led to this, what we call the first global maritime trade route. This was quite astonishing, that from Manila through the port of Acapulco in Mexico, now you see how the return route goes far north, because before they found that return route, going back to this map, which again I think is so interesting, you see the pink lines, those are the currents, so the ocean currents. So if they didn't go far north, like I'm talking through Alaska down the coast of the Americas, they would have ended up in South America, and that's what they did. So that's really important in developing this trade route. So the trade route went from the Philippines through Acapulco, overland through central Mexico, and outbound from Veracruz over to Spain and back. So there was the importance here is to show that there's tremendous amount of fluidity in the trade of material goods and people, ideas, concepts, new materials, silk. So from 1565 to 1815, that's 250 years. The Manila galleon sailed between Manila and Acapulco, bringing Asian goods and people, things like porcelains, silks, lacquerware. we can just imagine at the port in the Philippines, of the outbound, getting the ship ready to sail. And then upon arrival in Mexico, and Acapulco was the Parian. And this one here is, they had a Parian in Acapulco and then also in Mexico City. So it was a tremendously exciting time to be receiving these new goods from Asia. Again, silks, cloth, threads, finished goods. Here we see another image of the Parian, where we can see the merchants getting involved in the process. If you go to Acapulco, there's a wonderful museum. It's the Museo Fuerte San Diego. And there we can learn about this history. It's really very fascinating. So we see the porcelain and some of the silks, the Manila, they call it the Manton de Manila, that came to the Americas and influenced what eventually resulted there. Another important thing that came from, that most people I think now believe, at least that's the way the research seems to be going, is that this wonderful cloth that is known worldwide as ikat, and in Mexico is known as jaspe, is most likely was introduced into North America, into the Americas, into Mexico via this route. So this route that we just saw, you can imagine that these cloths, the people who knew how to make these cloths were also on those ships. This is not an easy process, as we'll see. The ikat is very complex. So the technology transfer is one that would require a pretty good use of dyes and weaving, which they already had, and perhaps with the know-how of the some of the sailors that came over, the artisans. Some people believe that the adoption of ikat in Mexico could have something to do with this ikat patterning looking a little bit like the mottled skin of a snake. And in Mexican mythology, Mesoamerican mythology, the snake played a very important role. So this is a theory that Virginia Davis has written about, how this could be a reason, and back to that role of mythology that we talked about earlier, this could be one of the reasons why this pattern really became a very important aspect of the Mesoamerica adopting this new technique. The other thing that came from the galleons were these called the Manton de Manila. Most likely what may have ended up on the rebozo would have been the fringe. So you see the fringe here, that could have been. I think they're still not, it's not definitive, but I'm kind of the opinion, you look at things and they can tell you a lot, you know, combined with some reading, but the visual references are actually pretty strong. The other thing with the Manton de Manila, so again, we see the fringe here, and this is not necessarily related to the rebozo, but I find it interesting that I think, okay, so the Manton de Manila basically came through the Americas. So like, you know, when you play Monopoly, like, you know, you can go just passing through, right? So here, they were just passing through. This item, this garment, as the Manton de Manila is worn in Spain, never really ended up in Mexico, as they say, tal cual, like this. But what did remain in Mexico were the beautiful flowers. So when you go to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, or if you go to, these are in Guerrero or in Chiapas, this imagery is from that early introduction of those images. But back to the rebozo, we're really, as it relates to the Manton de Manila, we're really looking mostly at the fringe and how that could have been a introduction. So during the colonial period, which was a 300-year period from the let's just say 1500s to the 1800s, the rebozo became a very popular and adopted garment. And it's really kind of amazing to think about, you know, like what was happening that made this true and made it sustain for 300 years. But there were all kinds of let's say ordinances that were issued by the crown, who could wear what types of garments. And again, we talked about the head covering, the fact that the weaving tradition was already present in Mesoamerica. This garment really took off and was worn by all the classes of Mesoamerica, the mestizos, the criollos, the indigenous, and the castas. The castas are, here we see some references through the casta paintings. Those were the blends of the indigenous with the Spanish, the indigenous and the, or let's say Spanish with the African heritage. And so we see that even through the casta paintings that the Mexican rebozo was worn by all socioeconomic groups within the colony. So the differences may have been, or not may have been, were in the type of cloth, the silk versus cotton, the embellishment. So there was stratification, you know, even though everyone wore the rebozo, they wore different types of rebozos, reflecting their socioeconomic position. Here we see some other close-up of casta. There are some beautiful casta paintings. I think LACMA has many of them, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and one of their great historians is there, the National Museum of History in Mexico City. But they're really extraordinary paintings, at least to see what dress looked like during the colony. Later in the colony, there were the 19th century travel painters, and they started a tradition that in Mexico, they know it, they call it the costumbrista paintings. These are the travel artists from Germany, France, Italy. Some of the ones that you may know, Nebel, what's the other one's name? Linati from Italy. And then another man we'll see from France who did some beautiful work. So these are paintings that reflected the customs, the costumbrista art. So we see the rebozo as a very important garment. This is a the painting from the detail of this one from Nebel, but these were the early tina poblanas. But this is a beautiful work. And you see the man on the left, he's wearing the male equivalent of the female rebozo, which is the sarape. So just as the female garment of the rebozo became a national garment, so did the sarape for the man. Here's one of my favorite artists. This is Edouard Pingré. He was French. And I think he actually really loved the rebozo because many of his work shows the rebozo and also the detail of the rebozo. So if you get a chance, I know that the Fundación Banamex has a lot of his pieces. Here's some more. Again, the rebozo. Today, to see some of these colonial rebozos, there are several museums and collections. One of the museums in Mexico City that has the largest, let's say, aggregate collections is the Museo de the Franz Mayer Museum of Decorative Arts and Design. And their rebozos date back to the 18th and 19th centuries. So it's a great opportunity. They're usually in their vaults in the collection area, but occasionally we have opportunity to see what some of these beautiful pieces looked like from that period. We can see note some things on these. The fringe is very short. So some of us have rebozos with long fringe. And then on the this darker blue one has these picos, these points that what they call the colonial or Spanish style fringe. Some of the artisans are reviving that style. But look at the beautiful ikat in these. Really quite exquisite. This is another style of rebozo that's not seen today, but these were the commemorative rebozos that usually had scenes of Mexico, scenes of the different avenues and parks, and they were, I don't know much about them. I know that some people are studying them, but they were part of the landscape. But look at the fringe. Again, it's not that ornate. but there it is. Again, another piece from the Robert Everett's collection. Back to the Museo Franz Mayer, they actually have 3 collections there of Rebozos. They have the Robert Everett's collection, they have the Franz Mayer collection, and they also have the more recently added Ruth Lechuga pieces. So they're really lucky. I think they are the largest aggregate Rebozo collection. These are how the Rebozos are kept in a museum setting. We find that very interesting. Some of us have talked about how do we care for our Rebozos. Well, in some ways, you know, Rebozos are to be worn. So we're happy using them as cloth. But, you know, in a collection setting, the best way to keep a Rebozo or any textile is to roll it. Textile does not, they don't like creases. So just a brief segue here. There was a period in Mexico's history where the Porfiriato, this was when Porfirio Diaz reigned, and he was very fond of European styles. And because of that, the landscape in the dress and arts of Mexico kind of stopped looking like Mexico. It looked a little more like if you were in Paris, in the Champs-Élysées. If you go down the Reforma Avenue, you might think you're on the Champs-Élysées. And if you look at the old catalogs, you might also think you're shopping in Paris. But this was in Mexico City. So this is what the elite started to wear in Mexico. So they very much took a turn to adopt European styles. So the Rebozo really didn't have much of a place during this period. Here's some more images, some more. But while the elite was mimicking Europe, we still had in the countryside, and this is an important part of Mexico in the past, present, and today, is the dichotomy between the urban and the rural. So in rural Mexico, they were still wearing, as we can see in this image, the Rebozo. But seeing these pictures side by side, it's quite a contrast. Here we see the women, unbelievably, the get-ups, the hats, and then we have the woman on the right who most likely looks like she's the servant or the child care. So there was a great polarization that started to occur when there was this extreme concentration of wealth, both in industry and in the countryside, in the agrarian sector. That later even became some well-known caricatures that did these political drawings, leading to the Mexican Revolution. So all of that we just sort of went through, the imagery of the Porfiriato and the great wealth and that great divide that existed in Mexico, came to a head, and it was the Mexican Revolution that really tried to address those socioeconomic asymmetries and the dichotomy. The Rebozo played an important role in the visual history of the Mexican Revolution. Many of you may know the Adelitas, and the Adelitas could be maybe like the Rosie the Riveters. They're the ones who either accompanied their men or were also directly involved with the boots on the ground fighting in this really very protracted and tragic period of Mexico's history of their civil war, which is known as the Mexican Revolution. After the revolution, this is a period that's called post-revolutionary Mexico. That's how it's commonly referred to. And it's just what it says. But what started to become important there was the rejection of everything Porfirio was, which was the adoption of European ways and art. So this now was a return to Mexico. Let's go back to our natural landscapes, to our human landscapes. What do our people look like? Let's, in the case of the Mexican muralists who were used during this period of promoting the public, let's say, message of returning to our roots, the muralists were employed in this effort to get the Mexican populace to learn more, excuse me, and to return to their own roots. So the rebozo took on a very important role because it was actually kind of employed as part of this initiative, that and then along with the sarape. So in the post-revolution between, I'd say, the 20s and the 30s. Later, the rebozo was used as an iconic symbol in the golden age of cinema, as well as in the very popular calendar art and other art that started emerging in the 40s and the 50s. Here we'll see some imagery. This is an early image of Diego Rivera's mural, a detail at Chapingo. But we can see in 1926, so very early after the revolution, there's this desire to teach and to depict what is our real Mexico. So it's not the European women, it's the countryside. This is the rural sector. And Chapingo is an agricultural school. So he definitely painted this with the intent for it to reflect that agriculture at the university. Also Diego and Frida in her, I think there's some questions I've heard that Diego wanted her to dress this way or she chose it, but regardless, she represented Mexicanidad, and that was very important to both of them in their desire to return to what did Mexico look like. So imagine Frida when she was walking in New York City wearing her garb. People loved it. But here, this is one of my favorite images of Frida Kahlo, taken by Imogen Cunningham, and it shows her in an absolutely gorgeous rebozo, in a very relaxed position. And then Frida painted herself with Diego, highlighting her rebozo. Here we see the calendar art that I was referring to, that glorifies this garment, the women who wear them in a very romantic way. So this became very important imagery of Mexico in the 40s and the 50s. And in painting, it's so glorified here, and it's almost it's a folklorized version of Mexico. Very beautiful, but it's also, we can see, quite I guess folklorized is the only word I can say, but you see the woman wearing her rebozo and the man in his sarape. Also in cinema, in the golden age of cinema of Mexico, the rebozo figured prominently, and it wasn't just on the women, it was used as a tool to separate the virtuous woman from the not virtuous woman. So in following the narratives of these films, we can see how the rebozo was actually used for that message. And today, the rebozo is worn. This is the former First Lady. Politics aside, we're just going to admire her beautiful rebozo. She really loved wearing them, and she wore the silk rebozos from Santa Maria del Rio. We have a designer, Carla Fernandez, who took the rebozo and started making fashion with it. We see the ikat cloth that she used, and this young girl here who is also happy to have her rebozo. We see the rebozo now in fashion shows. This is in Michoacan. It's also an important way to show young women and how to use the rebozo so that this cloth endures. We see the rebozo at ferias. This is a group of Argentine girls enjoying the rebozo at the feria in Pátzcuaro. I was helping them see the rebozos, and after they got them on, they all bought the one they're wearing. So having it on, something changed. They said, oh, it was quite magical for them. And here we see Lila Downs, who many of you know, and she has taken a lot of Mexico's garments, and she is often seen wearing a beautiful rebozo. This one, as we saw in our film, we know where it's from. It's from Ahuiran, because we see the feathers in it. And here we have a beautiful rebozo worn by Dania, a friend of ours in Tenancingo. But these are ways that the youth are wearing them, so that they're not really just associated with elderly women or women carrying babies, but they're also fashion statements. Here's our latest fashion statement, one of our new friends and members of our Rebozo Club. We've been working with the Reboceros with some of their jaspe ikat face cloths. And look how beautiful this is. She's wearing, this is Makiri. I hope she doesn't mind, but I'm showing her off. So she's wearing her beautiful rebozo, accompanied with her rebozo cloth face mask. So this is our newest iteration of ways to wear the rebozo. Thank you, Makiri, for that. A little bit on the ikat. Let me see how we're doing on time. I'd like to get into the ikat because it's such a special thing in Mexico. Ikat is often associated, even by textile experts, it's associated with many other countries. It's amazing. You can ask somebody, oh, where do you think ikat comes from? Or where do you associate ikat? And they'll say, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Japan, India, Guatemala. Rarely will they mention Mexico. So that's why it's quite fascinating, because Mexico has one of the most amazing and visually fascinating warp-faced ikats in the world. And not a lot of people know it. So that's why I find it quite fascinating and exciting to share this. Once people learn about ikat, they become quite impressed. So as we mentioned earlier, it's very likely that this dye resist cloth, it's a dye resist thread that we'll see, came in on the Manila galleon. There's no real evidence at this point that demonstrates that there was any ikat, that's the dye-resisted thread, pre-woven dye-resisted thread. There's no real evidence of that in Mesoamerica, but there is some evidence of dye-resisted cloth. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the dye-resisted cloth is after it's been woven. So think about tie-dye and Jerry Garcia. That's a dye-resisted cloth, a t-shirt. So here's a cape that has led some of the researchers to think that this could have been this cape on Netzahualpili, who is now Netzahualcoyotl's son. Some people say this could have been a pre-Hispanic form of a dye resist on the cloth, but it's not ikat because they resisted the cloth after it was already woven versus it was before it was woven. Again, our famous trade route. These are some of the ikats of the southern sea of the South, not the South China Sea. What am I trying to say? It's the Philippine Sea, the southern region of the Philippines. There were these really beautiful ikats from there. So again, back to some of our visual imagery and references, I think there are connections that can be made. And I find it interesting that ikat was present. There is evidence of pre-Hispanic ikat in Peru, in the Incan areas in the culture. But you know why? I think it's because, remember the current? Remember that current? That current went south. So when the early ships got into that current, way before the Spaniards, there was activity way before the Spaniards. You know, they say they discovered all this. That's not true. There was so much happening before that. But it's very likely that ikat could have arrived to South America because that's where the currents took the ships. And since the currents didn't take the ships to Mexico, there was no pre-Hispanic ikat. Didn't arrive on the shores until these galleons introduced it. So here we see a close-up of ikat, how it's in the process of being made. There are many steps, but I think you can see here that this is what we were referring to as the pre-woven threads. So where you see those ties on these colored threads, that is where it's binding. Ikat actually comes from the word menikat, which means to tie or to bind. So here we see it's bound, and where it's bound, it will not absorb the dye. So there, hence comes the word dye resist. So once those threads are cut, then these beautiful, here we see Fito from Tenancingo, we see the thread bundles. Well, first we see him painting the design, and then they tie the design, and then they dye, and where it's been bound, it's not going to pick up the dye. And then we see the threads after they've been unbound. So you see, it's pretty complex. Today, we can go to the workshops in Tenancingo and see how some of this is done. They're painting on some of the patterns. This is an extraordinary process. Some people use rollers. This is a dye process where they see the ink blotter, and each one of these blocks represents a different rebozo pattern. So if you have a rebozo that has an ikat pattern, this is the template. So that gets stamped onto these cords. See the patterns? Isn't that unbelievable? And the rebocero knows exactly which pattern they're after, which combination of patterns they're after. The more patterns on a rebozo, they're different cordones, multiple cordones. They can be simple or very complex. So you see where the spaces are, that's where the string will bind them. So when they get dyed, that will resist the dye. This is another method that they use in La Piedad, Michoacan, which is another community known for their ikat. But see, and they work really quickly. This man here has a little knife. I think you can barely see it, but there's a little knife on his index finger. So he'll wrap and cut, wrap and cut, wrap and cut, wrap and cut, wrap and cut. And there aren't many people who still do this. When we go to visit some of these people, the people who are doing the tying are elderly. And when you see that, you're like, oh my God, back to the visual references, it doesn't take too much to realize this might end. And if the ikat ends, if no one's tying the threads, you're going to end up with just chalinas. And there's nothing wrong with a chalina, but a chalina is a solid colored shawl. It has no ikat in it. And wouldn't that be sad if this went away? So that's why we kind of get excited about it. Here we see a better image of how all of this has been tied off. The binding, see the binding? Isn't that amazing? And then when it's unbound, there we see very clearly the pattern. One thing that's very unique about Mexican ikat rebozos is it's warp-faced ikat, so all the design is in the warp threads, but it's extremely tight register. If you look at a rebozo, you'll see that, oh my gosh, it's not like some other regions that sometimes purposely do it, where they'll have some of the threads off, they're not lined up, where it gives it sort of a fuzzy look. Here, that's not the case. If you look at the rebozos of Mexico, they're extremely lined up, which is extraordinary. So here we see the threads. The top part is called the labor, that's the work part, and then the bottom part is called the fondo, that's the base. This looks like it'll become a venado rebozo, which is a striped rebozo. So you'll see alternating stripes with some ikat. Here we see where the ikat threads, and again, look how they still stay very aligned. A lot of times when people weave, the warp threads can shift. So the rebocero is constantly adjusting, and they have these blocks that make sure that these warp threads aren't shifting. Because if they shift, the rebozo will be fuzzy. So here, look, see that? Isn't that incredible? Look, so you look at this and you like, that looks like it would be like a printed cloth. Somebody printed that. How could it be that is made from binding all those ties and then tying it? But that's what that is. That's that exquisite cloth that comes right off the loom with the ikat threads. And then here's some rebozos that haven't been empuntados yet. They don't have their fringe, but they've been cut off the loom. On a petal loom, they'll get about 20 to 26 rebozos in a series. So it's like an etching where there may be more than one, but there's a limited amount. So if you see a rebozo you like, there's probably a run of like 20 to 26 of them. So what do? You buy it because you may not see another one like it. Okay, although there are some traditional designs, so I will say that some of the very traditional ones. Here are the designs of Fito. He plays with color, and so he's kind of known for that. They call him the confetti man, you know, not the candy man, but the confetti man, and because he loves to play with the colors. Here again, we see the ikat threads going into the loom. The rebocero must assure that, see those white knots at the bottom? Those are the knots that are keeping those threads tight so they don't shift. Beautiful cloth on the loom. This is what is revealed after the weaver does his work. And look at the variance of design. The patterning is really exquisite. And this goes to the creativity of Mexico. The creativity really never ends. And people have asked me, wow, why are Mexicans so creative? And it's because it's what's almost in their DNA, is what I say, that there's this urge, there's this need, there's this, it's just like breathing. And for a while I worked at 10,000 Villages as a volunteer, and I said, there's not a lot here from Mexico, why not? And they said, well, Mexicans don't like making a lot of the same thing. And I thought that was really interesting, because it's true. They don't want to be told to sit down and make 1,000 pieces of one thing. They're creating, they're artists, they're designing, they're imagining. So look again at these patterns. The one on the left, the black and white, is really amazing because it's actually floating. It's the artisan Miguel Flores decided to make the venado stripe, which is the stripe, a black stripe. And by making it a black stripe, the ikat's kind of floating in there. Very, very creative. We also have the wonderful, sometimes overlooked, not as much now, it's getting a lot more attention, is the beautiful knotted fringe. And again, this could be hearkening back to those mantones de Manila that we saw. So this is a form of a macrame, knotting. This is a close-up where we can see how the artisan, the empuntadora, that's what they're called, empuntadora, because she's making the punta, is tying the knots. Here, these colors are coming straight off of the warp, and they get integrated into in a very fluid manner into the rebozo style. So here we'll see a few of the, back to creativity, these wonderful pieces that, when the punta is a different punta, you can have the same cloth that they call tela, but when you change the punta, the entire characteristic and personality of that rebozo changes. So I know people who have the same tela, the exact same cloth, but they'll have the same piece, but with different puntas. And you're like, how come you have so many? It's the same one. You go, no, it's not the same one. The fringe makes it very different. Also very characteristic of the rebozos in Tenancingo are these beautiful phrases. Usually they're given for their mothers, or mainly for a romantic relationship. Te quiero, like one side will say te quiero, or maybe the other side mucho, or they might say hoy te quiero, mañana no. You know, I don't know, I'm just teasing, but they have these beautiful sayings. They also have some beadwork that they're doing in the fringe. This is on a chalina. Remember we talked about the chalina, that's a solid, so there's no ikat in this. But this is designed so that really the leading role is going to the fringe in the Shakira beads. Not Shakira, Shakira. Here we see another example of how the artisan, the rebocera, the empuntadora, I think it's very beautiful to look at rebozos where the tela and the fringe complement each other. So you see here, they complement quite well. Here we have some show-offs where we're very proud to have some of our rebozos de caramelo that we'll get into. Rebozos from Tenancingo. We're always very happy. We get quite excited as soon as we put on a rebozo, and some people even start to dance. very interestingly, I find as much as we love wearing the rebozo, one of the things that really brings so much joy to me is to see how the rebozo is worn throughout Mexico in the ethnographic setting. This is how the rebozo is used as an ethnographic garment. So this is any day of the week, you go to these villages, this is how the women are adorned with the rebozo. The woman on the left is from Popoloca, that's one of Mexico's cultures. She is from Puebla. And the other lovely woman, who's just so amazing, is from the Central Valleys of Oaxaca. She's covering her head. They're both covering their head from the sun. Here we have a beautiful woman who is Mazateca, and she's wearing hers. That's how the Mazatec tend to wear them over their, kind of like the Adelitas may have worn them over their chest, tied at the waist. It's a very comfortable way to wear a rebozo. And another place that often gets very overlooked with the use of the rebozo in the ethnographic setting is the Yucatecan Maya. So this lovely woman here is wearing, that's how they wear the rebozo. It's very warm there, so they use it, they drape it, and it's more of a decorative garment for them. Probably no other place is emblematic of the ethnographic rebozo as is the state of Michoacan and the Purepecha women. It is unequivocally an integral part of their identity. And they never ever leave home without it, and they go into church wearing it. So here we can see how this residual impact of the early Christianization and evangelization occurred in Mexico, that to this day, women upon entering church will cover their heads. These are scenes of the Meseta Purepecha, a very beautiful region of Mexico. One of the famed reboceras, Cecilia, many of you know her. And here we see the continued use of this ancient technique of the backstrap loom. Just briefly now, these are the current, there were many more in the colonial period, but today, these are the main rebozo centers of Mexico. And there'll be a copy of this, and you can see it later if you want it for more research. Tenancingo does the cotton ikat. Santa Maria del Rio is known for their silk and articela ikat. La Piedad, Michoacán, articela ikat. Moroleón, Uriangato in Guanajuato is cotton ikat. And in the state of Michoacán, we have 3 to 4 main communities that do different types of rebozos that we'll see. In Ahuiran, where they do the feather work, they also do these beautiful, I know many of you have seen these beautiful articela fiesta rebozos. So these are the styles that come from Ahuiran, and I think it's interesting because you can see all the knotted work that goes into this before the fringe is even tied on. And I know some people wear them the other way because they want people to see that tied, all that knotted work. It's just gorgeous. And this is in the town of Angawan, one of the other, I call them the 3 A's. It's Ahuiran, Angawan, and Aranza. And then there's a T, Turicuaro. But this is the beautiful brocade work. It's quite exquisite and unique. It's a brocade weaving from the town of Angawan, Michoacan, in the Meseta Purepecha. Here, one of our other A's is Aranza. They make a very special type of rebozo that is known in the local language. It's a patacua or sprang. Anyone who's a weaver might be familiar with that term. It's a very complex gauze weave. So the gauze weave is a weave where the weft thread is wrapping or lashing around the warp thread so that there is some structure to the piece. If this wasn't lashed, there would be a lot of shifting between the warp and the weft threads. So when you see somebody doing this on a backstrap loom, it's really an extraordinary and probably one of the more complex weaving techniques. It's in Spanish called gasa, and it's gauze weave. Here's our darling woman from Adelita from Turicuaro. This is the one that kind of didn't let the A's continue. The 3 A's, now we got the T, Turicuaro. And they make these really beautiful cotton rebozos that you put them on and you never want to take it off. Nancingo, we've already reviewed some of that, but we'll just show briefly some images from Tenancingo in the state of Mexico. This is pretty much in between Cuernavaca and Toluca. It's really not far. It's not hard to get there from Mexico City. There's a bus that goes there every 20 minutes. And it's an amazing town. This is pretty much the epicenter of the cotton ikat rebozo. Life wouldn't be the same without Tenancingo, without the artisans, without this unbelievable cloth that they produce. Here are some of those artisans. We have Fito. Everyone knows Fito. His name is Adolfo, Fito for short. Luis Rodriguez has also been in the long heritage of generational reboceros in his family. Here we have, we'll see more pictures of him coming up, but this is our rock star on the left, Evaristo Borboa. Sometimes I refer to him as he's the Mick Jagger of the rebozo weaving, because he's got quite a stature and everybody wants to meet him and everybody wants his autograph. He's getting up in years, but he's definitely, he goes hand in hand with Tenancingo. It's hard to imagine Tenancingo without Mr. Evaristo Borboa. We have Jesus Zarate, who also is doing some creative ikat designs that you can see are not the traditional geometric pattern. They're more figurative. Here, these are the very traditional rebozos from, this is what Tenancingo is mostly associated with with their traditional designs. Names such as Labor Doble, Laborudo, Mediasteca. These are the rebozos that women come from Puebla, from the state of Mexico and Michoacan, because this is what the women of Mexico wear. These are their rebozos. And on any given Sunday, you'll see the marketplace, just a big flurry of people negotiating and buying these rebozos. As you can see, one is never enough. Here's El Güero. He's one of the great reboceros, very creative. Saturnino is his name, Güero, because I'm guessing because of his lighter toned skin. And here again, we have Evaristo Borboa. He's good, he knows it, and he's very proud of it. So he's a man about town. You can see it in the picture. Oh, I'd like to go back and read this. He says this, and Rebozos son mi delirio. They're my delirium. They're my life and my pride and joy. I will come to my death with the threads of the rebozo in my hands. So we're happy he's still with us. He is definitely getting up there. And but here we see a beautiful image of Evaristo with those threads in his hand. This is his bedroom, so he doesn't have a separate room for weaving. He weaves where he sleeps, where he lives. La Piedad is known for their articela, ikat. Again, very important. These are the rebozos that many of the women in Yucatan wear. Remember we saw the Maya woman from Yucatan? They are the articela rebozos from La Piedad. These are made on the pedal loom, and they're made in series. So they kind of pump them out a little bit more. I don't mean to take it away from it still being a craft. It is definitely a craft. It's a bit more on the commercial side, so they're making a higher volume. Santa Maria del Rio is in San Luis Potosí. This is just like we had Evaristo is the Mick Jagger. Here we have Arturo Estrada. He would maybe be the, I don't know, Dave Grohl, or he's one of the younger rockers, but he is someone who has made his mark in the rebozo world. Very creative, and he works with articela and silk, which are the fibers of Santa Maria del Rio. And he is a great master, and a great master because he teaches. He teaches at the Escuela del Rebozo, and he's sharing his knowledge for future generations. Here we see some rebozos from Santa Maria del Rio. They look different and this one is the caramelo, which is the 7 colors. Here's the school in Santa Maria del Rio. So it's really wonderful to know that this will continue. Here is a beautiful caramelo. That is a picture of my mom's that I have. But the caramelo is the 7 colors. So that's the silk caramelo. Here's a map that you can see later at any time of the different places where these towns are, most of them in central Mexico. The future, what does the future hold? Well, here we have a picture of Marta Turok, anthropologist, who has worked tirelessly to help sound. She pretty much sounds the alarm bells. Like, we better wake up, people, because if we don't pay attention, this could go away. The reboceros might not be here. If it's not passed down generationally, we may be in trouble. Up on the right-hand corner, these are from a young rebocero, so that's always encouraging. And there is a new school in Tenancingo. That's also very encouraging because that's how this will get passed on. So we see the rebozo is not just a garment, like we started. How can we talk just about a garment? It's an entire historical and cultural legacy that manifests itself in one place in Mexico. Viva Mexico. Do not leave home without it, your rebozo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was wonderful. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Now, if the participants would have any questions, you can just type them in the chat box. We did ask people if you had any rebozos of your own that we would like to have people show them. And but before we do that, because I think we have to unmute everyone for that, I'd like to say that our next presentation will be November 12th, and it will be the illustrious Marta Turok that Stephanie just mentioned, who is an anthropologist from who's working in Mexico City. She'll be with us on November 12th to talk about the trees of life. So many of these artisans that Stephanie mentioned we're planning to be at Fiesta Latina in 2020, and we are expecting them to be here in 2021. And so the dates for that you should put on your calendar are June 18th through the 20th, Fiesta Latina 2021. And so now maybe I'll start things off by showing you my rebozo, which is a beautiful silk ikat with this wonderful fringe, as Stephanie was showing us. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love it, silver and black. I also have one of the gauze rebozos from Arances that Stephanie, I actually went with Stephanie on a trip, and we met this wonderful artisan who had produced this beautiful gauze rebozo, which I wear quite often. And before we end today, I'm going to ask Stephanie to tell us about how you can get a hold of her and perhaps also go with her on her many adventures around Mexico and Colombia. But first, let's see if anybody else has has a rebozo to show while I'm looking for questions. Anybody have a rebozo they want to show off? Michael, can you unmute everyone? I think I see some.
I see some people.
Let's see. How can we? Can you? There's
Oh
one.
God, I'm not dressed.
Hi, Mitzi.
Hi, great. I loved your presentation.
Oh, you're too
I've
sweet.
always wondered where ikat came from into Mexico and Guatemala. You know, the rebozos.
Yes.
So, Makiri, do you have a rebozo to show us?
Well, I have this rebozo from Tenancingo.
Oh, beautiful, Makiri.
And she also
Thank you
had a
so-
question for you, Stephanie, which is, are there any reboceros in New Mexico?
What I know about New Mexico, and I haven't studied it very much, but they have the tradition of the colchas. But as far as, and I know that New Mexico has the wonderful tapestry weavers, the Trujillo family. Actual rebozos, that is a very good question. If there's been a transfer of this technique and culture over to the Hispanic United States, or that never, that was there from the beginning. That was there before, while the U.S. was Mexico. Good question. I don't know of any, but we'll investigate.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm not sure that anyone else has a rebozo to share, so maybe Stephanie, you can just share with us some of those that you have behind you, or the one you have.
Okay. Well, what I did was I wanted to put specifically some of the classic ones here, what I felt were classic rebozos. Here we see the very traditional labor doble for Tenancingo. And they're in the different, traditionally they're blue and they're black and brown. But
We can't hear you, Stephanie. I'm sorry.
Oh, that they're playing with color now.
Okay.
So you can see a labor doble in a different colors. Here we have some rebozos from Santa Maria del Rio.
So Stephanie, it looks like you're one of their best customers.
Well, we collectively do a good job. Let's just say we do a good job. And
Well, I know that you've also been helping the artisans during this time of COVID. And so perhaps you can tell everyone how they can also help the artisans, and also about the beautiful face masks that people are.
Oh, okay, right. So that was, I'm putting on my Western New Mexico University colors.
Yay.
Okay, so yes, we've been since COVID came into our lives, we took some time we decided to work with artisans that we visit when we are on tour, and if we're going to be with them in the good times, we want to be with them in the bad times. And I also felt that it would connect us as a community. I think we've created some interesting and really wonderful binding community through this initiative. And it's not charity. That's very important to me, that we're actually buying items from Mexico, which means they get to continue making them. So we're not just sending them, money. We're sending them money in exchange for them to continue, and for us to have the honor of wearing their beautiful items. So, and we've been doing, as Makiri had in her photo, I won't look just like her, but I'll do my best.
Oh, that's a beautiful one.
So you see here we have the ikat cloth. So we have these face masks from Mexico. And if we wanted to maybe we could start playing with fashion and combining our masks. Our masks and our rebozos.
Nice, very nice.
So if anyone's interested, I think there will be information at the end, either on how to get to these communities. We are hoping to launch our business again, our tours. We love going to Mexico. We can't right now. So hopefully next year in September, we'll be able to go to the Feria del Rebozo again in Tenancingo and visit Michoacán for the regional Rebozo, and also visit Santa Maria del Rio for their silk Rebozos. That's our grand tour of the Mexican Rebozo tour that we just love.
So,
And yeah.
I think someone else had a beautiful, Cecilia Monzo. Can we go to her? She has
Cecilia.
a beautiful rebozo. Let's see, where is Cecilia?
She doesn't have video on right now, so we can't spotlight her.
Oh, Cecilia, can you put your video on?
There we go.
Let's see that beautiful rebozo.
Oh,
There it is.
very nice.
And that's from, where is that from?
I bought this when I went to Cancun. I bought it in Yucatan.
Wonderful.
Oh, how nice. Thank you, Cecilia. Do you wear it?
I haven't had the chance, but I'm dying to do it this winter.
Okay.
I live in California, so it's a little hot in here.
Oh, I understand.
I love it.
You can wear it on your head, like the women who were protecting their head from the sun.
I love the presentation because I learned so much, especially the ways to wear it.
Oh.
Wonderful. Well, at Fiesta Latina in 2021, you should join us here in Silver City, New Mexico. That's June 18th through the 20th. And we are Stephanie is going to do a Rebozo fashion show.
I am?
Highlight a lot of the Rebozos. And we're going to show all the different ways that it can be worn. And so let's see, do we have any other questions? Let me go back up here. Oh, here's one. In the film, we saw the feathered rebozos worn at some special events. Could you talk a bit about who buys those rebozos and where, on what occasions are they especially worn?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So the rebozos in Michoacan are in effect worn for different occasions, and they have different rebozos for different occasions. That they have a gala fiesta, the one with the very fancy shiny fringe is usually worn for parties, for fiestas, just like we would have different clothes that we wear to either a daily event or maybe a light cocktail party or a big shebang. You know, we're going to look different. So they do too. So those would be worn more in a fiesta setting. Could be, there's some ritual events. There's an event of the, what is it called? It's the Ceremonia del Atole in one of the towns, and all the women wear those shawls. And I have to say, I originally thought those were made, unbelievably, I thought those were made for turistas. That these are made for us. They made them to sell them to us. And then I was, versus something they wear. And I was in a small village in Michoacan, not so small, Santa Fe de la Laguna, where they don't make rebozos, and I saw the rebozo shops. I'm like, oh, well, these rebozo shops are here because the local women are buying them. So it's when I first realized that this was several years ago, but it was kind of an awakening for me that this is part of their dress.
So what about particularly the feathered ones?
That would definitely be up in the ceremonial. Those are not daily wears. Yeah. Those are, I don't know a lot about the feathered ones. I do know that there's a history of weaving with feather in Mexico, but I just know that those are special garments, and they're definitely not a daily wear item.
Great. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. And so, Stephanie, we're going to put all of your information along with the video so that people can access it later, and they can share it with their friends, and they can contact you, and they can check out your website, Tia Stephanie Tours. Is it Tia Stephanie?
Yeah, Tia Stephanie Tours. And we also, on Facebook, we have a group page that's called the Mexican Rebozo Club. So anyone who's interested in participating, it's an informal group, but we like to share our rebozos, tell stories about them, learn about them. So we'll share that link with you too. It's a Facebook group page called the Mexican Rebozo Club.
Now, Steph, one last question is someone wants to know, how are they cleaned?
How are they cleaned? Well, I don't wear the same rebozo like often enough, so where I'm wearing it out and washing it. But any delicate garment that I have, and delicate is a relative term, because when you see people in Mexico wearing them, they wear them, they wash them, they wear them, they wash them. I mean, they're not treating these as these delicate garments. It's their clothing. It's like if you wear your shirt, you know, people you wash your clothes. So they would I would wash it, I would hand wash mine in probably a warm water. That's what I do with some of my clothes. I put them in the bathtub with either cold or warm water, a little bit of a very mild, the cheapest soap, very inexpensive soap, because that's the soap that doesn't have all of the, it's biodegradable soap. And then the reboceros actually brush the fringe. They'll get a brush and brush it out. I hope that helped. So hand wash it in a tub or in a bucket.
Okay, it looks like we got all of the questions. And so thank you so much, Stephanie. This was really informative and just so enjoyable. Loved seeing all of your rebozos as well. Thank you everyone for joining us. You can always send us any questions or any more comments that you have. And we'll see you on November 12th for our next presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.